we're in the middle of Tafna Naf Halacha Gimel. So just what it said, we're not really doing the Shulchan Aruch. It says, "Sakina magil b'klivishin." You catch them in a klivishin with taran. Klivishin nikrish sicha b'mayim al ha'esh. Afilu eino ata al ha'esh. Rak shedena resech. It doesn't have to be al ha'esh. We talked about that at a different time. That whether the klivishin has to be al ha'esh or not al ha'esh, but it has to be rak shedena resech. It has to still be resech. What does that mean? That it has to be shedena resech. So Mishabur over here tells you that if you look in Tafmin days, the Rambam makes the point that it again stresses the point that the waters have to be roiskin, and that's the temperature of Hagol is that the water is at roiskin. Okay? Now, most people would assume, most people who read this din Shulchan Aruch will assume that roiskin means that the water has to be a rolling boil. Right? That's what a regular person who looks at this din says roiskin means it has to be a nice rolling boil. Okay? In fact, you tell people when they kasher a kli, you say to them, if you stick in something cold into the kli, if you stick in one fork into the kli and the water stops boiling, so then wait another few seconds. That's a bit later. Wait a few seconds till the water heats up again before you put it in the next kli. That's what most people would usually think. And we would translate that as 212 degrees. In fact, it's a shuvah from Moshe, where he says, I'll read you these words, V'gam tzorach shechoim hamayim hamagilin, yeh loy pachos mishtein meis, ushneim es asar, sharak b'choim zeh heim roisim hagolach. Okay, and then at the end he says again, okay, so he says it two times. What to most people is obvious. Most people just assume that the water has to be 212, which is when water boils. So that's what the simple reading of what this din is. But many people who work in Kashrus are familiar that Rabbi Gelsky says over something from Moshe that you can kasher even 190 degrees is considered roiskin also. Okay, and the question is, where did that shita come from? And what would be the basis for such a shita? And let's try to understand where it comes from and whether it's correct. Okay, so before I tell you where it comes from, there's a raya, and we'll discuss this raya a few times today. There's a raya to the idea that roiskin doesn't have to be 212 degrees, a rolling boil like we see it. What's the raya? The Beis Yosef over here, and more clearly in Yerdeh, says like this. How do we know that a kli rishon shlo yagad ha'esh is still considered a kli rishon? So it comes from halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. In Hilchos Shabbos, we're familiar with this, which is if you have a kli rishon that was used on the fire, you take it off the fire. The din is even when you take the kli rishon off the fire, it still has a din of a kli rishon that you're now put spices into that kli. Okay, you're now put uncooked spices into a pot. That's a kli rishon because it's bishul on Shabbos. So it says the case in the Gemara is if you had a fire that was boiling when Shabbos started, the Ben Ishmashis it was boiling, and you took it off, and Misha Techshach, you're not allowed to put spices into it because if you do so, you're putting it into a kli rishon, and therefore it's going to be bishul on Shabbos. Now in Hilchos Shabbos it's a chumrah, but the Beis Yosef, the Torah and the Beis Yosef say lekula, that it's considered kli rishon, even if you took, just like l'chumra it's considered kli rishon, also l'kula is considered kli rishon, and you could kasher, and then that's what we talked about, exactly which case you're allowed to do that. But listen to the case. The pot was on the fire at Benish Moshes, you took it off the fire, and then when it got dark outside, you then put spices into it. Okay? Now, everybody knows that if you take the pot off the fire, a second later it won't be at a rolling boil. And if you wait from Benish Moshes until it gets dark outside, whatever your shear of that is going to be, as short as it's going to be, it's sure not going to be 212 at that point. Yes, it is. Yes, the Gemara seems to be, the way the Beis Yosef is understanding it for everything, that's still considered to be roiskin. And in this din, that's a rak shedena resech, he's bringing the mamish from this Gemara, and yet he's calling it roiskin, even though it's not 212 and it's not at a rolling boil. Okay, so just as a over idea, that there should be such an idea that unless you could have roiskin that's not at a rolling boil, and it's not at 212, seems to be mamish from this case, right? We were talking about roiskin. It's coming off of a Gemara, which l'chayre is talking about that the water is not roiskin. Yes, this thing that says he says like the Gemara says there in Shabbos. Now, we would question that because the Gemara is talking l'chumra. It's fish lunch. It's fish lunch Shabbos. Right. So I'm not talking about that part of what the Beis Yosef is talking about, but he uses that as the explanation for this din. It comes from that Gemara. He brings it here and here there. He brings it. That's what the makar for this din is. So here's the thing where it says here, Aruch shedena resef is coming from a case where we wouldn't think the water is roiskin, If we took that pot off, we wouldn't think it was Roiskin. So we just see that the musag, that it could be less than 212 and less than a rolling boil and still be Roiskin. You just see such a musag. We will see whether that is or is not.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. The simple reading of the Shur is not like that. Okay, so now we will see whether this raya is or is not a raya to what Rabelsky said. But it's a raya to the idea, but it just opens ideas. There could be such a thing that something could be not 212 degrees and not at a rolling boil and still could be considered Roiskin. Okay. Now, originally, I asked Rabelsky what he meant many years ago, what he meant, where this psak came from, and he said the following. He said like this. He said, well, Moshe never told him that it's at 190 degrees. Okay, that's an important thing for what we're going to talk about today. Moshe never told him 190. Moshe said, when a certain thing happens, that's considered Roiskin. Rabelsky went home and tried that and decided that thing happens at 190 degrees. Okay? So now, the way I originally had understood what Rabelsky said was like this. If you heat up a pot of water, we're going to do the play with the toys in a second, you'll see. When you heat up a pot of water, I'm not doing it because you have to watch it get hot, that's why. If you heat up a pot of water, which is the hottest part of the pot? Which is the hottest part of the water? The water that's along the bottom, and then the next is what's along the edges. The metal is burning hot, right? The metal gets hottest, and particularly at the bottom. So originally I thought that what Rabelsky said was that the water that's along the edges, okay, along the part that has to be kashered, that water, when the middle water will be 190 degrees, then the water along the edges will already be at Roiskin. Okay, it's a hashara that when the middle water is 190, then the outer water, which is at the hottest parts of the pot, will already be 212 degrees.
Does it bubble at the outer?
So there's bubbling on the bottom. We'll see bubbling on the bottom earlier.
More stuff on the side, especially the steam jacket things.
Well, a steam jacket is different, but we're going to look at this just as a flat bottom. So the fire is just on the bottom, the bubbling will be on the bottom, but you know that the metal is going to be hotter. So the water. So originally, this is how I had understood it: that the water along the edges, where the Kashering has to happen.
Do you have a probe with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
The water along the edges, where it's hottest, that's 212, and the middle is 190. Okay, so not that 190 is Roiskin, 212 is Roiskin. But when you have 190 in the middle, then you have Roiskin along the edges. So I said, that was what I originally understood. So when I've been going through this again, I said to Rabelsky, but in came, then you could only kasher the pot like that. If I dunked a spoon into the center water, I wouldn't be able to kasher with that. Because the water in the middle, I'm saying now, it's not Roiskin. Mm-hmm. And more in your menu is that, what happens if I kasher in a factory? I take this water and spray it through a spray ball. Right. Or I take it from one tank to another tank. So there, whatever mile I had that at the edges, it was 212, I lose that as soon as I go into another cleat. Because then just 190 is going into that thing. So Rabelsky said, no, you got it all wrong. It's not what I said. That technicality of the water going through plays a role, we'll see in a second, but really the main point is like this. He said, and now I can put the water on. He said that when you boil water, as the water gets hotter, before it comes to a rolling boil, there's a word, this is a Yiddish word, a para, okay, which means a steam cloud, okay, like to be steaming.
It's white.
What?
It's very white.
It's white? But the water gets white?
Well,
okay, Rabbi Schwartz said para is used as an adjective to describe someone who's like steaming mad. Okay, so the word para means steam, okay? And Rav Moshe said when you get the Roiskin doesn't mean that it has to be bubbling. Roiskin means you have to have a para, that you should form this para above the pot. That's what considered Roiskin.
When it boiling, also it gets very cloudy.
Okay, that's what Rosh said. Right, now, wait a second. Now, you will see.
When the para what?
When there's a para, there's a form of clouds of steam are coming out of it. That's already considered Rosh. That's what Moshe said. Now, Rabelsky went home with that para, and he decided that it happens at 190 degrees. Okay, now, what you'll see is, I'm going to give you something. I've been testing this, okay, and I did.
So why does he say till 12?
What?
Well, why does he say till 12?
I'm not going to answer. If Moshe meant that it's just the edges of 212, we would understand it. Okay, so I can't answer you. Yeah, Rav Moshe said. I forgot to say. Rabelsky says. Rav Moshe said that even so, you should always do 212. You should do 212. I have to say. Yes, Rabbi Rabelsky.
What is the minute?
No, there is a minute to always do it at a full rusicha. To do it at a full rusicha. Rav Moshe himself, Rabelsky said. Rav Moshe said himself that you should always do 212 anyhow. The minute you should always do chatzil. You should do 212. So now I did a bunch of tests here to watch what happens, and you'll see that what it goes on is like this. There's the Aruch, 3 stages of how hot the water, of what you're going to see here. The first stage in the area of like 120 degrees, you'll start seeing wisps of smoke. Okay? Little wisps of smoke will start coming out of the pot.
What temperature?
At about 120-ish, okay? You'll start seeing wisps of smoke. That's the first stage of smoke, of steam. Wisps of smoke, meaning of steam. Yes, of steam. Then, when you get to the area of like 160 degrees, okay, it'll go from being just these thin wisps, like, occasional just like little things of steam, to a nice amount that I call already a steaming, okay, a nice steady flow of smoke coming out of it, of steam coming out of it. And then, not until we get to like 200, or so it's even more than that, do you see a really strong, heavy amount of steam coming out of the pot. Okay? So, I took all these toys yesterday to Rabelski, on my way to this other meeting. And I said to him, so tell me, I didn't say it this strong, I said, where did you come up with 190 degrees? What happens magical at 190 degrees? It doesn't seem to be any consistency that something happens there. There's a fair amount of smoking coming already at 160 degrees. Of steaming going on at 160 degrees. So, if you want to think that's considered roasting, okay. And in fact, there's a sheet in the Shulchan like that. There's a sheet in the Shulchan that says that the maximum temperature you have to do for alcohol is not roasting, it's yatzel display. So they hold that the para is, when it gets to that good amount of steaming, where Moshe's para is roasting, they hold that amount of steaming is considered roasting. But the truth is, most people wouldn't think like that. It's hard to believe you can capture 160 degrees. And most people would think, when you'll see the heavier steaming that goes on at 200 and 205 degrees, they'll say, most people looking at it would say, oh, that's probably about to boil. You look at it, you see now you see it's starting to have the wisps. I don't know if you can see now. Okay, we're at 110, 111. You start seeing wisps of steam coming out of it. Okay, just occasional wisps.
So I see already rice on the bottom.
But you see the bubbling. You see mamish from the start. You'll see boils. You'll see bubbling. Now, Rabelski explains scientifically what's going on is that water is boiling. The water on the bottom is boiling. As it comes to the top, it gets cooled off by the water come in it. So most of the bubbles don't even make it to the top. Okay, but a fair amount of them are even making it to the top. Okay,
so you're put the probe all the way on the bottom.
We're at 110 degrees. The water's not hot now. You can stick your finger into it. Okay, the water's not hot yet.
You say the bubbles. So really rice.
Those bubbles are. The
deeper you put it in,
if I touch the bottom, it would be rice. I'm assuming.
Let's see. Don't assume.
Okay, I shouldn't say. I don't know where on this probe is what measures. Okay, so I'm not sure if it's fair to just stick it at the right.
It's usually pretty much at the point. I just put it
at the tip.
Yeah.
At the tip.
Yeah, but when I touch it to a pipe. Well, this is not the point,
No, when the water, it's not going to. So I don't think that I'm measuring it right. I don't think it's accurately measuring it. Okay, but so here you're going to see wisps like this.
Where? Show me the wisps.
See the steam, just sit down. You'll see the steam coming out of it. See, just thin amounts of steam coming out of it. Okay, that's what I call a first stage. Okay, now this stuff's not even that this point. That anyone should think that you can't believe that's what Ramosha meant. Now the second stage at like 160, we'll be there in a few minutes. We get to like 160 degrees. So then you could imagine that's what he meant, and I think really that's what the other Rishonim hold. You could imagine that's what he meant. But I said to Rabbi, if that's what he meant, so then what are you telling me that 190? At 160, we're going to be at that point, okay? Well before we get to 190. LMI, and the simple understanding is when you see what happens at 200, 205 degrees, there's already starting to be a more serious bubbling. You see good amounts of steam coming out of this thing. So most people look at them and say, oh, the words people would use is say the tchilas resicha. It's the beginning of boil. It's not a full rolling boil, but it's the beginning. That's what most people look at it, and you can imagine Moshe saying that. But so we sat, and the water bubbled, and Rabelski took the pot off the fire and put it on the table to try something, and then he stuck the thermometer under the pot, on the table, and he tried all kinds of things. We actually had an audience, okay, whatever, that's a different story. And he tried all kinds of things, and he had no explanation. He didn't give any good explanation for what was going on. At the very end,
I'm sure he didn't use a probe. Was he using a probe?
I'm sure he did. Yeah, I'm sure maybe it wasn't digital in those days. Yes, I'm sure maybe it wasn't digital in those days, but he definitely did something like this. He told me. He said Ramosha told him what he's supposed to look for. He went home, and then he did it. Okay, so I try to be better than that. Is that after I did it at home, I went back to him. I said to him, which one? You'll see what happens at the 160. It looks like what he's describing. Okay, but you don't believe that at 160. So now, the only thing he came up with at the end was, he said maybe this pot that I'm using, which is what I used in test number 1 and test number 3 on your paper, this pot is a pretty small pot. So what happens is the water that boils on the bottom can get to the top. Lots of that steam can get to the top without having to give off all its heat into the rest of the water, without being cooled so much by the other water. So in a smaller pot, you'll have your para at a lower temperature. And if you had a really big pot, he said if you take a yeshiva kitchen pot and you boil it over there, then in that pot you won't see the para until 190 degrees. Okay? Now, so first I said, so why is this pot the wrong pot and that's the right pot? Who decided which pot is which? I said, and maybe we should say is that in every pot it depends when it happens. Okay? But then afterwards I left, I said, wait a second. We did a test like that. In the second test, which was not a yeshiva pot, it was just a bigger pot than this, it didn't hit steaming until 200 degrees. At 196, it was still not boiling. So at 190 in that one, it wasn't even at the middle stage.
So you got to use the size pot. You got to use the right size pot.
The second one was a more medium-sized pot.
So obviously, he was right. It does change with the size of the pot. So he probably used a certain specific pot, and it's just the right size. And at 190, it was
right. So, exactly. Okay. So if you found just the right pot and came at 190, so that means so now forever and ever, that's what the temperature should be. So either it depends on the pot, or we have to figure out what's an official size. I don't know what it should be, but what made 190 into a magical number?
You're right.
Because you use a specific pot so either it's pot by pot, which makes no sense, or you'll see what happens after 200 degrees. Now, okay, we're getting a little bit closer to a steaming. You'll see what happens when we get over 200 degrees. There's a good heavy steaming, and the bubbles are much more serious. That they're the average Talmud Chacham in the street will look and say, hey, it's Aruch boiling. If you tell them what Moshe says when it's about to boil, when it's close,
it's in every pot. Or
Aruch, but it's over 200 degrees, and it's not exactly the same for every pot. But it's more uniform than the other one. And maybe then also it depends on the pot. But the number seems to be higher rather than we're at 156.
I just don't understand this whole concept about something that Rav Moshe, he heard from Rav Moshe that he said something about para without any written thing, without any source where Rav Moshe is getting it from, and based on that, the whole Kashrus is affected, and this becomes a shita. It sounds like a chassid and a rebbe with halacha. That's what it sounds like.
You're right.
I don't get it.
You're correct. You're definitely correct, and that makes me apprehensive about the whole thing. Kosher came that he didn't even. The way he says it, and I've heard this more than once, he didn't bring the pot to Rav Moshe and say, tell me which one it is. Rav Moshe gave him a description. I don't know how elaborate that description was. We're at 162. He took that description and he went home and tried it at home. At least to go back to him and say to him, so that's why I took the pot to him. I said to Rav Moshe, I said, tell me what you're looking for. Okay, we're at 163. Okay, it's moving now from being wisps to being more of a steaming. Okay,
right.
And as we start moving, you'll see a more consistent cloud coming out of this thing. Okay, now there are Rishonim who hold that the max you need for Hagolah is Yad Shel at this point, and my guess is the way Rav Moshe is saying this is the shita, and this para. They didn't use the word para.
I don't know why you're saying that. Rav Moshe said para based on our shita. Para doesn't say anywhere in the Gemara.
No, I didn't say that.
I didn't
say that. But where would the shita come from? Okay, I shouldn't say it. You're right. The shita could be totally independent of this thing, but there's a stage that happens that's similar to our type of boiling that happens at their temperature also. It's not just Yad Shel, but it's just a number. At Yad Shel, but there's something that's similar to what Rav Moshe is telling us for an hour kind of reason. So we could say their shita is along the lines of our shita rather than just a completely different. Okay, we're at 169. Okay, now you watch now from now till 200 degrees, and you don't have to watch every second. From now till 200 degrees, and tell me if you see any meaningful change. I'll tell you when we hit 190.
Meaningful what?
See the amount of steaming that you see now.
Right.
Okay, this is a certain amount of steaming that's going on, and there's a little bit of bubbling and whatever is going on. It's the same, bubbling is almost the same the whole time. Okay, there's little bubbles across the whole bottom, and a couple are getting to the top consistently. So there's a couple making to the top all the time. But the steam, now just watch the steam. We saw the steam with that earlier stage, it was just wisps. Now it's gotten to be a more consistent, what I call a light steaming at this point. Okay. But the heavier steaming is not. We'll see. Will not happen until. Okay, there's another question where Rebelsky was trying to be saying big pots and little pots. That he wanted to say that the bubbles make it up and they don't make it up. Is that you'll see that when this finishes boiling, or even now if we took it off, it will continue steaming like this for a very long time. Okay, so now, if you're going to say it's only because the little bubbles get to the top, if I take this pot off the fire now, it'll keep doing this steaming in here, even without any little bubbles getting to the top. And it doesn't depend on the bubbles. If I took it off the fire now, it would keep doing what it's doing. Okay, and
let me just ask you, on Shabbos, once you take it off the fire, how long is it considered Klei Rishon?
I mean, how long?
Time-wise.
I mean, until how long it cools down?
8 hours later?
As long as it's hot. I don't know if it's I don't know what the temperature is. That's okay. As long as it's Yad. So now, the truth is, now that we think back about that Gemara that I told you, the Gemara is not as strong of a raya as it sounded like. It's a raya that doesn't have to be a rolling boil. Right? Once you take it off the fire, it will not stay at a rolling boil. Not more than for a second. It will stay at a rolling boil.
Somebody told me that if you have a klicheres or some sort of heat, we take the heat better. It can boil for I don't know how long.
Okay. Good. So in a very strong pot, maybe maybe we can imagine it'll be at a rolling boil for 10 seconds. It can't be at a rolling boil for very long. That's not going to happen. But could it stay at 205 degrees? Yeah, that could be. Put the cover on. Could it? In other words, it'll stay at this temperature, going down. I measured on your paper. I measured going down every 2-3 minutes. It stays very hot for a long time. And I did uncovered. If you did it covered in a big pot, a thicker pot, and this and that, it could stay at 205 degrees for a very long time.
The longer you heat it up at the beginning, the slower it goes.
So it cools. Okay, and also it has food in it. It has double gush in it, so it stays hot. So if you're looking at something, the Gemara is just saying is that you still see from the Gemara that there's such a musag that without a rolling boil at 212 degrees, it could be considered roislim. That I still think you see from the Gemara. But do you see that it goes all the way down to the 190? Labdafka. I'm saying that could be, if you say that the temperature is 205,
well,
it could be roislim.
The guns in Hashmash is only 9 minutes, you know what I mean?
What did you say?
It could. It's only when like the guns in Hashmash is on 9 minutes.
Right, well, that's the truth.
You know?
Right, well, okay, that's correct. That's correct. The Danish Russian is really not that long.
Right.
That's correct.
We're at 100. The raya from Shabbos is the raya from Shabbos is that you take it off on Shabbos as long as it's Yatzalah, it's bishul.
Right.
The raya is that even if you take it off, it remains a Klei Rishon.
No, that if you would be in Hilchos Shabbos, but in Hilchos Hagolos Kalim, and in your day in Hilchos Hagolos Kalim, the Beis Yosef says that's the raya to this din. That's because this Rishon rock.
Hilchos Shabbos is that when you take it off the fire, it remains a Klei Rishon.
Okay.
In Hilchos Hagolos, there's an additional condition that you need Maler Resicha. That you know a riot in Shabbos that'll be Maler Resicha the whole.
That case, he's saying that case is considered, that case, what the Gemara describes over there is what is over here is a good kashering. You could kasher the way the Gemara says that you could look like.
What I'm trying to say is that out of Hilchos Shabbos we can pull out that it remains a halachic Klei Rishon after you remove from the fire. I don't think you can pull out of Hilchos Shabbos.
You think the Reisech part of it he's not getting pulled? Okay.
Reisech is something that is Hilchos Hagolah.
Okay. He's right talking about. If I remember, he may even say. Maybe even he may even say preferish that he's bringing that the words here raksha den resech are coming from that Gemara also. That I can't say that for sure. Let's look inside the Beis Yosef. And as he bring that Gemara, this din comes. Okay, let's look at it again. Okay, we're at 176. Okay, I'm sorry that's going so slow. We had to just time it right so you should see it at the right time. What? We're at 176. To me, the theme looks relatively the same. Maybe a drop stronger than we had before. Okay, I'm sorry that's going so slow.
We're in test number 1, right?
No, this is... No,
which one is it?
What am I doing?
Besides pot.
This is actually test number 3, because test number 1 was done with this pot on a gas fire, and test number 3 was done with this pot on this ceramic electric boil. That's this hot plate.
Set on medium high. For an early evening. What difference does it make? What
it made the difference was is that, I'll tell you why it made the difference was, because when you're in steam, what you see of vapors is totally in the air temperature and the humidity in the room. Mm-hmm. So really, if you want to do this test accurately, you have to replicate the same thing again and again in the room. So like the second test I did with my daughter baking cookies on the other side of the room. So it was in a very hot kitchen. Okay, so that might make the room be more hotter, and therefore you see less vapors. And the other one was over the exit. I'm not convinced that any of that makes a tremendous difference, but I figured for honesty I should write down that it was done under a drop different circumstances. No, I wrote that the oven was on. The oven was on. But Rabbi Belsky hopes to try to figure out answers to the question. He did turn off the air conditioner in his room. Okay, he did turn off the air conditioner in his room to see if that would help. That was one of the things that he tried.
Some small... What are we up to? What temperature?
What
temperature?
In the 170s.
Some small continuing rising. So soon it's going to change, so most of them are going to be rising.
Yes, and oddly, this I can't explain. When I did the test in this one, I don't remember what happened to Ardowski, but when I did this at home, all of a sudden came a certain temperature, all the bubbles disappeared. I don't know. Maybe someone just banged the pot. I don't know. But all the bubbles disappeared. You'll see that. All of a sudden, this is not such a fine thing.
188.
And all of a sudden, all the bubbles completely disappeared.
This is going to be the next Einstein.
I don't know why we're not moving any place.
The next Einstein breakthrough.
Maybe the plug's not working. We seem to have got stuck here at 174. Did I blow a fuse maybe?
Does it go fast?
Turn it off and then turn it back on.
It's cooling down. It's
Sure.
what? Did I blow a fuse?
Just start going faster towards here. Yeah, no.
Something very strange here because it always. This light's on. The light's not on. You see? I don't know what I did. Something's not working, right? It was the light is able to put it on. Is the light on?
No change. No light. It doesn't change.
I haven't seen the light on the whole time.
It always was on. Oh, I shouldn't say. I didn't see it today. When it's on, it's on. I'll see what's happening. I'm saying because the water's not getting hotter. No, it's not. It's on.
We need Jan. Jan, the blue views.
Maybe we burnt out the burner. It served its function. The water didn't cool.
I don't think it was on the whole time.
Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. You didn't notice it? Well, the fire is not working now.
Yeah, it's working.
Plug is working?
Plug is working.
Okay, so then obviously we burnt this thing out. It serves its function in life.
Okay.
Okay.
If you want to handle your belt has fallen.
That's right. He's able to. Okay, so we are not going to get to the end of this. If you want, we'll have to try this at home then. Anyway, so you can look at the numbers yourself. Then I'm sorry, my pot is over. Anyhow, so what it is so the
half run us over.
There we go. So in conclusion.
Leave it on.
So okay.
In conclusion.
If it does not work, it's going to have to go down, right?
Yeah, it is cooling down. It is cooling down. Okay. In conclusion, Moshe told Rabelski that there's a certain temperature under 212 that the water is considered to be roasted. Russians. A certain temperature is considered roasted. And Moshe describes it as a certain kind of steam rising up from it that's considered already roasted also. Rabelski tested that and found that to be 190 degrees. And when we recreated that test by ourselves and in front of Rabelski, let me just finish what I'm saying. We did not see any magical thing happening at 190. An early stage happened at 120. Another stage happened in an area of like 160 usually. And then the last stage happened very close to boiling, like in the area of 200, 205 degrees. So we don't see any magical thing happening at 190. It's hard to believe that the important stage is 160. So if we would have to guess, we would think that temperature for the Hagolah, even according to Rav Moshe, who's saying there's a lower temperature of Royston, that lower temperature of Royston would be in the area of like 200, 205 degrees. Not that it would be in the area of the 190, which doesn't...
What happens at 200, 205?
If you turn the page,
okay,
you'll see that there the steam gets much heavier. I'm sorry that you're not getting to see it. The steam gets much more serious, and the bubbling gets to look more serious also. A person who would look at that pot many people looking at it would say, this pot is boiling. This pot is about to boil. It's holding, it's just it's about to boil. It's easier to accept that anyhow. That Rav Moshe said that's considered already roasted. Roasted doesn't have to be the full rolling boil. That's already considered roasted. And that would fit in with what people would assume, and we see that happen. We don't see any major thing happen before that, except the stage at like the 160 when we got a nice amount of steaming. We didn't see any major things happening between that. I'm sorry you're not getting to see it yourself. Anyhow, so we're left with a question.
And there's another problem with the Kashering cable where there's no steam. When you're talking about inside closed systems, there's no steam altogether.
You think there's no steam? So you assume.
You don't need the steam. Steam is only a line.
Right, but there will be.
I don't know.
We covered the pot. It's actually a different thing. That if you cover a pot, so much steam forms under there It's because it's hevlach there. It's because it's like a kli rishon. The din we'll see later. The cover of a pot has to be kasher as a kli rishon, not as irui. If I have something over here hanging over here, this means irui kli rishon.
I'm talking about a total system where it's pressurized, where there's no nothing in there.
If it's
no
okay,
space.
pressurized is different. Pressurized is a different thing because then boiling happens at higher temperatures, so you won't have steaming and low. Yes, you're right. There will not be steaming those temperatures. You're right. There won't because you won't see any evaporation. So for that, I think David's correct. This is a different thing for Rebelski. That it's temperature that counts, not bubbles that count.
Yeah,
okay. That's a different thing. Maybe we'll get to that one day. That's a different thing. What happens if you go to Denver where the water boils at a lower temperature? What temperature do you boil at? Or what happens if you boil kasher with alcohol and it boils at 175 degrees? So you'll see bubbles, but it won't be boiling. Okay, so that's a different shita. Okay, but that's a different shmuz.
When did you understand that you had a misunderstanding what Rabbi Balsky said? Because when I talked to you a couple months ago, that's what you were telling me.
The original, yes.
Right. So when did you find out?
I'll tell you what happened. In preparing for today, I was looking through this again, and I took my notes from way back when, which I saw would never sign those notes, and I sent them back to Rebelsky and said, "Can Rebelsky sign these notes? Could you look them over and check them?" It never made it to him, so I finally just called. I said, "This is how I understood it from that time. Is that correct?" And I said, "No, it's not correct." And he gave me the better explanation. And
right now, you just wiped out Kashrus by 205.
Well,
no?
Well, it's Kabbalah.
No,
not necessarily Kabbalah Kafel. Let's say we go a spray dryer. The blue is at 350. So the Kashering is at Royston because that's the din is that the max you need for Hagol is Royston. You don't need more than Royston. So we say, okay, if a spray dryer will get to 200 degrees, let's say, so then under the right circumstances, if we're stuck or whatever, we'll say, okay, good. You didn't have the Royston, the traditional 212 degrees, but you had a Ma'al Resicha, as Moshe said, 190 degrees is Royston also. So there you can't do Kabbalah Kafel. The bli wasn't at 150 degrees. The bli was at way over. We have to do the maximum. So I think it's a serious question, and I didn't feel that I got a satisfying answer. So no. It means is that the CRC or Abba Hashkachos have to decide the question for themselves. Look at the evidence and decide the question for themselves. Like you said, it's a pretty odd thing that the whole world is making a decision based on one person's conversation without any.
It's convenient.
Yes, that's true.
I think I personally would never rely on 190 if I don't also have Kabbalah Kafel. If you really need Kashering, I mean the spray dry was signed on the the same as the young way.
Okay.
But you don't really need Kashering, and it's just when it's 190 business.
Good. You what? Finish yourself.
He doesn't like to be signed on 190.
If Kabbalah Kafel, if you have that's good.
That's more straightforward.
Just be signed if that on 190 and the temperature went in, it was over 190. And when it really needs Kashering, I wouldn't do that.
So either you're a Navi, that you're Mechavan to this.
It could be
what do you demand?
What
do you have in all those most places? They're very places.
You always have Kabbalah Kafel.
Because they only PSRize at 160.
Yeah, the PSRize 160 or 70. It could be when you're so it's
And what are you doing in the septic? If they do a septic?
I don't know if that's Kashering anyway.
So that means you would do for 170? If they run it at 160,
yeah,
no. You're saying it's 190.
What are you asking for?
I'm asking for at least 190.
You're right. You could do it over 212. Right. Okay. I'm thinking. So the truth is, right? That's what will tell you. As the Moshe.
I just think like all this smart. I mean, there's a section. Doesn't mention this whole 190 business. It doesn't. Because
right. Exactly. That's what. So after Rabbi Belsky himself will tell you, as did Ramoshe. He said it himself that you should do the 212 anyhow. This is just like a fallback. He once wrote something. I'll get it for you guys. He wrote something that he once heard about an RC came and said, this is how he came to the company. Is it possible that you could maybe get me water that's 190 in this clique? That was his opening position. That wasn't after 12 years of negotiations. That was the opening position. Is it possible that you could get me 190 in the equipment? So that showed Rebelsky how far this went. You know what I mean? So he wrote something to explain that how you should only be selling on 190 if your mom is really pressed like that. But Yossi is correct. You should do it at 212, and that the cases to rely on it is more for cases where the blia was less than that, like it's 160. But the Kabbalah Kafel is more straightforward. That's in 1-2 halachas if we ever get there. But this whole number of 190 is tackle.
What did Richard say about this? He was in the mouth?
by covers, okay, there's a machlokes in Achronim what you need temperature for kashering of the covers. The simple reading, we'll get to that. I don't remember where. We'll get to that one day. Is that the simple reading of the Pri Megadim is that you need to have roskun for that temperature also. Rabbi Shechter and Rabbi Genaik have a different reading of that. We'll get to that. I think the simple reading is that you need roskun for that. We'll get to that. Let's stop here.